Good morning. So we are lucky we have all the speakers on time. This is very good. Almost on time. No, time. It's still 1 minute. So since we tested our microphones and everything works, so maybe someone could start closing at least one of the doors. Yeah, thank you, Laura. Okay. Thank you. No, it's such a good thing to have everything working exactly at the time the meeting should start. This gives us more time to talk. And so I think it's a good idea to start immediately. Good morning. I am Anna Albazzi del Frate. I am going to facilitate this meeting, and this is a meeting that deals with several issues that were important for a very good friend of ours, Evelyn Dürmayer, who sadly passed away a couple of months ago. We are lucky to be here to talk about these things that were really at the core of her work. She was passionate, enthusiastic. She was really the champion of what civil society can do to promote important issues, to make sure that one is not afraid of showing important problems, pushing governments to do what they need to do, and keeping the dialogue up for doing that. So in particular, we will talk about three issues. So we will talk about gender-based violence, and we are lucky to have here the former Special Rapporteur Rashida Manjoo. We will talk about climate, Stop Ecocide, and we have the co-founder of the Stop Ecocide initiative. And we talk about human rights and access to justice, and we have Anna Giudice, who is really the leader of the team working on these issues at UNODC here at the Office on Drugs and Crime. Evelyn was doing this under the, International Association of Democratic Lawyers, that is the organizer of this meeting. So we are also lucky today to have here her daughter and members of her family. So we are happy to continue this discussion, thinking of her and what she left us to think about and work with for the future. To start, I will give the floor to Micol Savia of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. She is the Secretary General. And Micol, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Dear friends, dear colleague, it's an honor to welcome you. Thank you very much for being with us today. I would like to thank the co-organizer and speakers for making this event possible, and especially Anna Albazzi del Frate for bringing us together today and for all the work she has been carried out over the years with Evelyn Dürmayer for IADL in Vienna. We are deeply grateful for that work, and we very much hope that this cooperation will continue and grow. It means a great deal to us to be gathered here in Evelyn's memory, together with friends, colleagues, and members of her family. Evelyn was a pillar of IADL. She represented our association for many years at the UN in Vienna. She served as editor-in-chief of IADL International Review of Contemporary Law. She led important work on gender equality, women's rights, and fight against gender-based violence, and many other topics. She gave so much of her energy to strengthening international solidarity, justice, and human rights around the globe. But Evelyn was much more than her many roles. She was a dear friend, a mentor, a source of strength and inspiration for many of us. Her absence is deeply felt, and we miss her very much. At the same time, Evelyn's enthusiasm and determination continue to guide and inspire us. We feel a strong responsibility to carry forward her legacy with the same commitment and generosity that she showed throughout her life. I hope this event can be one step in that direction, a moment to remember Evelyn with love and gratitude, and also to renew our common commitment to the struggles she cares so deeply about. Thank you again for being with us. I wish you a very fruitful and meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for joining us. As you may know, Evelyn was the previous chair of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women here in Vienna. And so I'm pleased to give the floor to the current chair, Christiane Ugborg, who is from the African Women's Organization here in Vienna, also co-organizer of this event. Christiane.
Yeah, I welcome everybody here. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ms. Nicole Savia and our former special rapporteur of violence against women, Rashida Manchou, and Jojo Mehta, the co-founder of Stop Ecocide, and Anna Chiotis, and Rosa Loga, of course. So Evelyn, maybe let me shortly say also, one should see her life also right from Porch. Her mother was a Holocaust survivor, Janka Kahan. Her father was a Holocaust survivor and also a resistance fighter, Heinrich Dürmayer. So you see already the thing how she grew up. She studied law. She knew how important that is in life. And then she spoke many languages. And then also she dedicated her life then to women's rights, human rights, and against gender-based violence. She really had so many events on that. Then also the fashion revolution. I think many of you know this very bad incident in Bangladesh. So she really dedicated her life also to that. Then also she showed us always very prominent women. She always wanted to make us strong, empower us. She said, you can see that women can make it, like Schütte-Lihotzky, Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky, where she was very, very much in touch also to the foundation. And then we had so many excursions, and in almost all of the events and meetings we had, there was a prominent woman speaking, and she always, you know, when at times we had challenges and then we would say, oh, we don't know how it goes on, but then she would always make a joke. She could be very full of humor, and she could always empower us to go on and not to feel to be laid down. And she also worked that the committee on the status of women should get the ECOSOC status, which is in progress. And she made many excursions, like to the IASA in Luxembourg, to the Baden-Rollet Museum, where also there was a research on a graveyard of a Muslim woman, a big one, and to ÖFSE. Then she worked together with all the committees in the UN, and she worked together with many universities, institutions, and research institutes. So she had a very broad range of people she could always work with and make together events. And a very last big conference he had in the year 25 here at the University of Vienna and also in the UN about gender-based violence. And then she went also with us to an excursion in the Art History Museum of Vienna about the woman Micheline Fautier, who was a very famous Baroque painter. She wanted to show that women are in all areas where they can succeed, even at times where the women's status was not so good. So she's for us, she's absolutely a role model. She was always for us here. She was always anything you could come to her. And if you feel at times you said, we have gotten this and that now, then you say, ja, schön dranbleiben. That means always stay with the thing. Don't think only because you have suddenly now something that you shouldn't work on it again. Yes, that is our Evelyn. We really miss her. We were really shocked about her death on the 22nd of March this year. And but we say if we really take her as a role model, and if we see all what she did, so we should continue. We should continue her path, and that is what we would try to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for these introductions, Nicole and Christiane. Now, even those who didn't know Evelyn have an idea of what an inspiring figure she was. So we will move now to the panel of three speakers, as I mentioned before, three issues that were dear to Evelyn, and we would like to hear from these very prominent speakers what they think is the progress that has been made over past decade, let's say, something like that, to see what we are called to do now. How can we bring forward the legacy and keep working, carrying the experience that Evelyn shared with us. So after the three speakers, we have invited Rosa Logar, who not only is a good friend of Evelyn, but she is the co-founder of WILP here in Austria, and actually may summarize very well in a feminist perspective these three issues. So we will ask her for a short summary of these three things. And if everyone stays on time, I think we will have time to share some other experiences. We have people who can really contribute a lot in the room. So I look forward to this discussion. So Rashida Manjoo, you're joining us from South Africa. So thank you very much for being with us. The former UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. Rashida, the floor is yours. I know you used to know Evelyn very well. Tell us a little bit, please.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to the IADL and Anna and everyone that has been involved in organizing this event. And a particular gratitude and thank you to Sophia and Evelyn's family for allowing us the privilege, the time, the energy that she gave to the struggle for gender justice in different sectors. She is missed. The other day, I kept on wanting to send her WhatsApp messages like we used to do. And I just cannot delete her phone number from my phone as yet. She is sorely missed. What I want to do is, I know the issue is to look at violence against women, but I want to preface it by Evelyn's efforts for gender justice and accountability in the violence against women sector, and some very practical initiatives that not everyone might be aware of. And to start with is, I see Linda McDonnell and Jean Sasson are on the in this session, and it was actually Evelyn who listened, who met with them in New York, other forums, and listened to their experiences over decades on the issue of non-state torture. She invited them to meetings in Vienna. And Evelyn as a lawyer looked at what are the lived experiences, what are the normative aspects, the theoretical aspects. And I think the CSW NGO committee in Vienna developed many documents on what is the existing law on non-state torture, where are the gaps, where do we take it? And for me, the fact that Evelyn's approach was this generosity of spirit and action. She walked the talk. She was inclusive. She brought people into the space, and she then expanded. But she was never one to claim ownership of anything. She brought her intellectual capacity, but was inclusive. A second initiative that I saw Evelyn involved in deeply was with an international NGO called Every Woman. It used to be called Every Woman Treaty. And her interactions and her generosity, again, in a younger generation doing diplomatic work in Geneva, in New York, but taking them under her wing, advising them, having one-on-one meetings, I think is another indicator on this issue of violence against women and how she supported diplomacy, but also assisting another generation with diplomatic work. Her support for two previous special rapporteurs on violence and the current one on the issue of the legal gap in the CEDAW Convention, and addressing the gap through the need for an optional protocol to CEDAW on violence against women and girls is another initiative that Evelyn supported fully. And one of the things, her reflections led her to think about why was CEDAW so resistant to even having a discussion about a new optional protocol. And she said to me, I'm going to talk to former CEDAW committee members that I know personally to get a sense of why is this pushback? Knowing there's a legal gap, why is the CEDAW committee so against any kind of discussion, let alone any kind of legal development? A fourth issue is her work, of course, with IADL, and Nicole has alluded to that. And I, was a beneficiary of her generosity last year in attending the Congress in Nepal. But this year, her moral and ethical compass came through when the discussion was on the IADL review for the March of 8th edition. And I said to her, can we do a special edition for March of 8th on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan? And the People's Tribunal had just taken place. The judgment had come out in December. And as part of the editorial committee, Evelyn there was no hesitation at all. So the special edition was on the People's Tribunal. Another issue that resonated for me was her moral clarity and her ethical stance on the genocide that is playing out in Palestine, in Gaza. And as a child of Holocaust survivors, it was deeply painful for her, but her moral compass was so clear on this genocide and the genocidal regime. And we were able to have those discussions, which many Western feminists don't want to have that discussion because they don't want to be called anti-Semitic, etc. But Evelyn was one of these people that you could have the discussion with. So those are some of the initiatives in recent years where I've seen the gender justice, violence against women come through very clearly. In terms of the 10 years of development, of course, the widespread, attacks on women's autonomy, on bodily integrity, gender-based crimes. We know the statistics, we know the manifestations, etc. It's not new. It's just a new, more visible phenomena that we're seeing with complete impunity, as far as I'm concerned. So the statistics are there. The systematic oppression and exclusion and erasure of women from public life. It's not only happening in Afghanistan and Sudan, etc. It's happening in context in the global north as well. And it's, the degrees are different, but let's talk about structurally the erasure of women from public life. A second initiative in the last 10 years has been the adoption of CEDAW General Recommendation 35. Again, another soft law development, expanding the General Recommendation 19. The focus on, third issue for me that I see in the last 10 years is the focus on less developed and new areas of manifestations of violence against women, including gender-related killings of women, femicide, feminicide, whichever, terminology we use, the issue of forced and early marriages, the issue of technology-facilitated violence, which has become more and more visible. A fourth area for me is the expansion of understanding of reproductive violence. So shifting away from a very narrow focus on sexual orientation, gender identity, and maternal mortality, and looking more broadly and inclusively focusing on obstetric violence. I think a term that's used, I see used by university students in South Africa, period poverty, so looking at menstruation and the impacts that it has. So this expansion of understanding is another development we see. Another development I think that has happened is, when we started looking at conflict situations, the overwhelming focus was sexual violence in conflict. Very narrow focus instead of a more broad focus. And now we see a shift beyond the sexual violence, but looking more holistically, the consequences, the impacts of conflicts on women, on girls, through the lens of human rights, humanitarian law, refugee law, and international criminal law. And that's a good shift instead of the singular focus. Another development in the last year actually is a new regional African Union Convention on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. There are deep concerns about that. It's a conversation for a different day on process and substance. So in the 10 years, and again, it comes down to, is there more violence against women manifesting in different ways, or is it more visible? And, I think it's both. I think it's both because we live in a time of deepening inequalities. We see the feminization of poverty as we've never seen before, I think. And we see these pictures now live streamed, on our televisions, on our phones, etc. And we can't escape the deepening inequalities, the impoverishment, the sort of feminization of poverty, and the consequences for women and children in many of the countries in the global north, global south. So the areas of concern for me is the focus of the global north often we see a manifestation of double standards. The kind of terminology or the focus areas, the focus on the global south is about poverty and violence and diseases and culture and religion, etc. And yet we don't talk about what's going on in the global north. And then when we talk about remedies, the remedies are sort of welfare-oriented remedies as opposed to thinking through structural aspects that we need to be looking at. How do we address the root causes? And many of the root causes emanate from our histories in the global south of colonization and continued systems of apartheid. Then the issue of genocide, the language is not being used. The issue of Afghanistan gets used very opportunistically by some feminists in the global north on the gender apartheid issue. But the crisis of human rights issues, of humanitarian issues, of refugee issues is not being addressed, and the resources that are going into codification of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, unfortunately, forget that we are dealing with human beings in Sudan, in Myanmar, in Afghanistan. So the kind of fixation is a double-edged sword. We want codification because we want good standards that we can then use, right? To name a manifestation, to have criminal remedies, that's good. But why do we forget the human in this equation when we push for codification? And for me, another issue on the violence against women is, why is there not the same kind of advocacy, the same kind of resources going into discussing an optional protocol to CEDAW so we can close the protection gap in international law on violence against women? And so I do worry about terminology. I worry about double standards. I worry about the hypocrisy. And I worry about the fact that I'm not sure anymore. I'm 70 years old and I've been doing this work for over 50 years. I'm not sure what kind of feminism today we're talking about. The divide between the global north, global south continues to exist. What sort of feminism? How do we name this feminism? Where is the radical feminism of naming things, of calling out things, of keeping, like Evelyn did, keeping on track on an issue? She had a very quiet, compelling way of doing the work that she did. And that kind of feminism I don't see, and it worries me, and it kind of makes me feel like I don't want to participate, stop the train. I want to get off this because I don't understand where is that feminism that the Evelyns of the world brought to the table. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry if anyone feels offended by my passion.
Rashida, please don't jump off the train, and please continue, stay with us, and thank you so much for this precious overview. Luckily, this meeting is being recorded, so many young people will be able to listen to your words that are really very important. Thank you so much for this. Jojo. What about ecocide? What about the past 10 years, please?
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the organisers of the event. And I felt very honoured to be invited to come and speak. I think we've already heard about how Evelyn was such a diligent kind of advocate, particularly in the gender justice arena, but also generally in social justice and particularly in climate justice as well. And one of the things that really struck me about her whole kind of approach was that she wasn't siloed with it. She was very much looking at where the connections were between these different things. And I believe that that's actually how she came across our work to move forward legislation to prevent ecocide. Effectively, we work with governments around the world as well as across civil society to progress the legal recognition of ecocide, or the most severe harms to the environment, as serious crimes. Because there is a gap in the environmental legislative space. There are obviously particular environmental crimes that are already addressed in various ways by the UNODC, but also in international environmental law and in environmental regulation. But what we see on the whole is that these largely sit in the regulatory space, that severe harm to the environment and of course to climate, because this is another dot joining that Evelyn made and that we do a lot of. Climate has often been sort of in a sense hived off in a certain direction where it's associated purely with the carbon question, with emissions and so on. What Evelyn recognised and what the ecocide law movement recognises is that even if we stopped all emissions tomorrow, if we don't take care of the climate regulating ecosystems, we still have a climate crisis. We're talking marine ecosystems, forest, soil, hydrological cycles, all of these things. And of course, the issue that we have with the sort of structure of environmental law is that, as with a few notable exceptions that are dealt with by the UNODC, we have a situation where large corporations can effectively sort of game the system that exists. If there are limits to toxins in certain contexts, then those limits are often, you might stay at those limits. And if you happen to go over and you happen to get caught, then, perhaps you pay a fine. But bringing the worst harms into the criminal sphere has a completely different kind of effect. So it creates an accountability and, perhaps even more important, a deterrence and a preventive aspect, which particularly with environmental harm are so important. We do not want to wait until the severe harm has happened, whether that be a huge oil spill, whether that be mass deforestation, whether that be all of those things that could potentially have been avoided had some kind of criminal provision been in place. That aspect is really important, and it brings in, and this is something that's already been referred to today in regard to Evelyn's approach, is it brings in the kind of moral and ethical side, because criminal law has a particular power to do that, because it taps into what we feel, what we feel is right and what we feel is wrong. And a few years ago, this concept, if you like, of ecocide, of recognizing the worst harms as serious crimes, was still pretty much in obscurity. There were no governments openly speaking about this in 2019, 2020. But now we have a very, very different situation. So I'd just like to give a brief outline of how this conversation has progressed over time. And also to particularly note that it was Evelyn who brought this conversation specifically to the UNODC, to the CCPCJ, in the form of a dedicated session back in 2023, which brought in some really top legal players like Antonio Benjamin from Brazil, like Andrea Costa, who works with in sort of incredible undercover work in environmental crimes, and really sort of brought it into this space. So in 2019, the first diplomatic mention of ecocide law was brought into the International Criminal Court by the Pacific Island state of Vanuatu. You will probably, anyone familiar at all with the climate law space will have heard about Vanuatu, because despite being, a small population of, I think, under 500,000, I mean, it's extraordinary. At the diplomatic level, it's not a small island state, it's a great ocean state. They really punch above their weight in the diplomatic space. And of course, as with many of the other Pacific countries, they're at the front edge of climate impacts. And in the Assembly of States Parties for the ICC in 2019, Vanuatu suggested to all of the member states that they consider the addition of ecocide as a fifth international crime. And so that was reopening a conversation that hadn't been on the diplomatic table since the original UN Environment Conference in 1972 in Stockholm. So that was a really, really significant moment. Another key milestone, which is really kind of, certainly from our perspective as an organization that sort of works in the kind of advocacy, advisory, and sort of public narrative space, was really extraordinarily important. Our charitable foundation convened a panel of international lawyers in 2020, and over the first half of 2021, they spent 6 months drafting a legal definition of ecocide. I actually have some copies here if anybody wants to pick one up on the way out. And that definition, it's very, very short and sweet and simple, if very legally powerful as well. I will actually read it because it's so concise that it fits on the back of a business card. And Evelyn would have appreciated this. She knew how important it was to be able to get through to those who are, in positions of power and can make a difference. And anyone who's dealt with a busy politician will understand the advantage of not presenting them with a 20-page report, but a one-sentence definition. So the definition of ecocide is unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, that language will be familiar to anyone who's familiar with the Geneva Protocols or the Environmental Modification Convention, or indeed the Rome Statute itself. But it's also super straightforward and very easy for anyone to understand. And most importantly, doesn't focus on specific activities. It doesn't say, unlike the specific crimes that are dealt with currently by the UNODC, it doesn't say if you do X, you are committing ecocide. What it says is whatever you do, if it hits a certain level of harm, then we're talking ecocide. And then that should create more serious consequences and be taken seriously as a crime. And since the emergence of that definition, the developments around the world in the political, the media, the legal and academic spheres have really taken off. It's proved itself to be a really robust starting point, to the extent that we now have an EU Environmental Crime Directive that was revised from 2008 and adopted the new version in 2024, which lists a qualified offence. I mean, it lists a range of crimes deriving from different aspects of EU law, but it lists a qualified offence that it actually describes as addressing conduct comparable to ecocide. So if the harm created goes into a certain bracket of seriousness, then there's another layer or level of sentencing, of penalties and fines and so on that kick in. The Council of Europe has followed that example, and their new Convention on the Protection of the Environment through Criminal Law uses a similar principle, and that's already had a number of signatories, including the EU. And what we've also now seen is a concrete proposal at the International Criminal Court from those Pacific Island states. It's Vanuatu, Samoa, and Fiji have actually put forward that definition into the working group on amendments at the ICC. So that is now on the table for discussion, also now strongly supported by the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I bring up because the DRC is becoming a very vocal advocate in Africa, and the conversation in Africa is moving forward very fast. But we've also now seen at the national level, at least 15 countries have proposals of ecocide law moving forward at different stages within their parliaments. So from the perspective of international law, this is an extraordinary acceleration. I mean, international law, as we know, moves very slowly. I always feel a little bit that with the UN treaties, you're putting, up to 200 nations in a room, and it's a bit like putting a lot of elephants in a barn. It's not surprising if they can't move very fast. There's kind of little jostlings to and fro. So looking at something like this very specific initiative, it's been fascinating to see how rapidly it's been able to move in parallel, sort of outside of that specific kind of UN treaty space. So I think it's very interesting to be able to put that forward. And I realize that I'm about to run out of time. So I just want to kind of, end in a way with a kind of, I suppose, a bit of a call to action, because that feels very in keeping with how Evelyn approached all of her work, and also a call to sort of join those dots. And that's something that, one last development that I'd like to mention is the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court at the end of last year brought out a policy paper on how the Rome Statute of the ICC can be used in its existing form to address severe environmental crime. And of course that is limited, which is of course the reason why it's important to bring in the concept of ecocide and to bring in a potential independent crime. But what it shows is that the focus on bringing together the criminal law space and the space of severe environmental harm and joining those dots is really important. So what I would really invite everyone here to do, and in your various sectors and roles, is to do some of that dot joining and to sort of bring into the conversation, how do we address severe environmental harm? Because when we look at the connections with, say, the world of finance, the world of investment, we see that finance flows like water. It will flow where it's allowed to flow. So with all the best initiatives in the world, unless you can actually close off certain channels, that finance will not start flowing in the right direction. So anything that, your information, that your sector, your conversations can do to raise that, I think would be honouring Evelyn's approach, and also very much moving forward this exciting initiative. I would say one of the few quite positive things that's really cutting through in an otherwise rather polarising and chaotic landscape at the moment on the planet. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Actually, we have a line here. So create the pitch, create the message that can go through. And I think it is a very important element that connects the different initiatives. And actually now we are going to hear from Anna Giudice, who can tell us a little bit from inside the United Nations how it may be complicated to bring these issues forward. Anna, please.
Thank you so much, Anna, and the organizers for inviting me. And I want to first say that I'm very honored to be here, and to say that what I've learned from other culture is that when someone passes to the next realm, we should celebrate their life and not be sad. I know it's a sad moment, but I think there's a lot to celebrate. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for, letting us celebrate Evelyn. I didn't know her for as long as many of you here, but I was always very impressed, and I always felt like this is a kindred spirit, similar kind of person. And I think this is what I wanted to first say, that we may be here representing CSOs or representing the UN in my case, or other organizations, member states. But what I've learned from the generations of feminists that came before me is that we're coming into the world as a whole person, and we are here as not as someone with a function, but as a whole person. So our personal experience, our personal lives, just as we heard that Evelyn was the child of Holocaust survivors, others here, myself, I'm a survivor of gender-based violence. This is something that creates who you are and influences your work. And I think sometimes in these spaces, we are not allowed to come as our whole person. And I think we should, this is really about also this moral compass that putting in who we are, our values, our systems of thoughts, what we believe in, is also how we can all find spaces for dialogue as humans that respect the same principles and have the same aspirations. And to respond to the question about feminists, I think, and where we are, the younger generation. I mean, I don't claim to be young anymore, but a little bit younger. I think that feminism has taught us, and we stand on the shoulders of many that came before us, that we have to look broader than sex, I guess, or gender, depending on the term you like to use. That's a whole other debate. And for me, the legacy is in queer activism, intersectional activism, feminism that is encompassing diversity in different identity aspects. And I do see those young people very active in person and online, because a lot of the work is now online. So I do think there is hope for activism within organizations, on the streets, in the UN meeting rooms as well, and but that will only work if we see the commonalities with other people, that even if we may have a different identity, there's so much that brings us together. And I really feel like especially intersectional feminism is the place where we can have those discussions, and that we can find the strength in each other, even when the world is looking very bad many days. So to say a few words about the work on access to justice and how things have evolved, I wanted to recall that we were in another meeting room a couple of months ago together, also with Evelyn, just before the CSW session, which she was traveling to with the Austrian delegation. And we were discussing what has been done in Vienna under the Crime Commission and the General Assembly mandates could feed into the discussions at CSW. And I didn't have the opportunity to go, but I followed it from here. And I have to say that despite all the pessimism that we all had, all the worries, in fact, we had an amazing result of the discussion on access to justice for women and girls, and we have some very strong agreed conclusions. And yes, that went through also a very sort of tense political moment between different countries that have different visions. But in the end, the text that has been adopted is really strong. And one of the aspects that comes, so when we received the draft a couple of months before from our colleagues at UN Women, and we realized there was almost nothing on criminal justice. So we did provide inputs through them, but of course we know that many civil society activists were also active before and during the session, as well as some very strong delegations like the Austrian ones on this topic, but others also that have been working with us. And now the text does reflect the need to address access to justice for women and girls who are in contact with the justice system, also as accused offenders, as prisoners. And this is often a group that is forgotten. At the same time as, of course, there's a strong focus on women who are victims, survivors of gender-based violence, and it should remain. But also, again, to see sort of, and what I've heard from everyone before and what I also saw with Evelyn was those are not isolated questions, because what we know, in fact, is that a lot of women in prison or that have committed an offense they are there either because the laws are gender discriminatory or because they finally free themselves from their abuser in some cases, protecting themselves, and unfortunately end up in the criminal justice system as, accused of committing a violent crime. So we know that these are not two different topics. This is the lived experience of many women around the world. Violence from society, violence from the criminal justice system, violence from other justice systems as well. And the other aspect that is really interesting in the CSW and also in the recent resolutions is something that I think in the criminal justice sphere comes very late. So we are finally talking about the fact that the people who have been involved in processes should be at the forefront and sharing their experience and also influencing policy. We've seen that happen before a little bit earlier, I would say, when it comes to victims, survivors, and in general, women's movements are often made up of people who have had experience and therefore are fighting for better treatment of their peers. But I think for especially in terms of really people in prison, it is in a way astonishing that we had to wait for 2025 to say that people with lived experience, which is the language being used, should be part of the discussion. But this is a positive development that I think we should also highlight. And again, just like many other sort of representation issues, it has to be a real involvement from the beginning, all through the discussions on policy and practice, and not the tokenistic approach that we've seen in many areas, whether it comes to youth, women, or victims, that are often sort of the one person that we put on the podium to give ourselves a good conscience. Yeah. So that's one aspect. And the third thing I wanted to mention in terms of our work, so we've spoken earlier this week about the work we've been doing on access to justice since 2023, where we had a resolution passed by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the CCPCJ on equal access to justice for all. And as requested by that, we organized an expert meeting in Brazil with member states, experts nominated by member states, but we had a lot of involvement of civil society in the preparation. We were bound by a very complicated mandate, so it was difficult for us to have CSOs in the room, although we had some that were nominated by member states. But we had a very large consultation with many civil society organizations before. And the result of the expert group meeting is a set of recommendations. We have actually reports on that. If anyone is interested, we can give them to you. But I want to highlight some words that are included in those recommendations that, in my experience, is the first time we have something in a UNODC report with all those words included. And they are, again, in my opinion, the result of many, many years of activism and work of feminists and other human rights advocates. So there's concept of promoting and supporting the implementation of people-centered, equity-based, gender-responsive, and identity-inclusive criminal justice systems and reforms to eliminate structural and cultural barriers, ensuring fair and equal treatment for all individuals, and strengthening knowledge, and so on. And I think those words were not a given to have in a UN publication. I'm quite proud of that. And then another paragraph that I think is also very relevant to some of these discussions, actually what we just heard from Rashida, there's a strong recommendation on addressing the legacies of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, such as systemic racism, discrimination, and poverty, as these continue impacting the experience of Afro-descendants, Black populations, and indigenous peoples and traditional communities in their contact with the criminal justice system. adopting an intersectional approach. And the next paragraph also uses this revolutionary term of intersectional, promote inclusive and intersectional approaches to access to justice by addressing the compounded vulnerabilities faced by individuals at the intersection of multiple identities and factors, including in integrated and holistic support services. So yeah, I wanted to highlight this. And actually, there is also language around the topic of environment and access to justice, and especially the impact on Indigenous peoples and local communities. I think this is also very positive. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that despite the fact that we are in very difficult times, there are positive developments, and we can really see hope. I think we can never give up hope in any case, but we really have to continue this work and continue attaching ourselves to the positive aspects of our work, and yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Well, after all, some good news. No, thank you, and it's so important because, as you heard, this may be the result of activism of persons like Evelyn, and in particular, I think that here in Vienna the process is very slow, and so when we hear about good news, we are very pleased about that. Okay, so we are a bit late, but we still have time. So if we are disciplined, Rosa, what do you think of what you heard? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this very moving event. I've been working in many areas with Evelyn, and we also had many discussions. And all many things that you were mentioning resonating with my experience with her. I mean, for me, it was also wonderful that I could talk to her personally about what discrimination means to us, and how we are affected by it as women, but also, as in my case, as a lesbian and as a Slovenian minority person who is assimilated and has lost her culture. All these things you could discuss with Evelyn, which was very, very valuable for me. And I was at a commission meeting in this March where Evelyn was also. We were together in the Austrian delegation, and we went to many events together. And had a very good time together, despite the difficulties that were happening there. Yeah, in the area of violence against women, I was, of course, also working with her. She invited me to talk about, for instance, discuss at conferences the Istanbul Convention, a regional convention that I have had the possibility to work for and to draft as an NGO. I was a member of the committee drafting for the government, which is quite, I don't think that this happens much now. With all the limitations that this convention has, but I think Evelyn also understood the importance of multilateralism from this point of view that women in their own countries often don't get justice, or there is no justice because the country is like keeping the women down, so to speak, the traditions and customs and the nationalism. So women were turning to the international field to get justice there. And that's also, I think, what is uniting the people all over the world, not only the women. I mean, are the people who want to get out of these restricted ideas of human beings and of society. And she was very, very clear about that. And also, I mean, I worked together with her on the non-state torture issue. I think I've seen Linda here and Jean. They have been very influential. Rashida has mentioned the non-state torture activities to recognize these severe forms of violence and not to put them aside. I also wanted to mention another aspect, because you have been saying that she was not a silo person. another aspect, we also worked together on disarmament. She invited WILPF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, where I am now active, to discuss the issue of disarmament, especially nuclear disarmament. For instance, we did a panel discussion together with Ambassador Clement, who is one of the fathers of this treaty. And she was very interested also in the connection of violence, interpersonal violence, violence in society, and violence in war and armed conflict, and how we have to look at all these together. And so this was also very important. And the last aspect, if you may allow me, in New York, you have mentioned agreed conclusions and that they are quite good, but there was a huge struggle about it. And I was sitting with Evelyn and others in the General Assembly Hall when the agreed conclusions were supposed to be adopted, and the US came up with 8 points that they didn't want to have into the document, and just demanded that this would be deleted. And I really want to mention some of this. They want to delete the term sexual and reproductive health. They wanted to delete the term multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. They wanted to delete to address disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. They wanted to delete the mentioning of reparations. And the whole paragraph on unilateral coercive measures, where it says refrain from promulgating and applying an unilateral economic, financial, or trade measures not in accordance with international law. And that was, of course, a direct criticism of what's happening in the world from our leaders of the most powerful armed countries. And they wanted to delete all this mentioning of their deeds, so to speak. And we were sitting there, and I mean, I have to say it was really a great example of diplomacy and also civil society together to reject this, and to not let the US get through with this attempt to send the women and the children and the girls and the society back to the Stone Ages. So it was very moving for me to be together with her in this important event. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Thank you all the speakers. Okay, we have 4 minutes plus a couple of minutes that all side events have been authorized to use. And so no questions, but just some very, very short comments. And I see already Tariq Hoza. Tariq, please.
Thank you. Evelyn was and will always be a source of inspiration for civil society. I distinctly recall her telling me about her visit to Pakistan in 1980s and meeting the military general of the time. And as an activist, she raised the issue of human rights and abuses that were prevalent in that military regime, and criticized the martial law's dictates and these violations. She had the courage to do that before a military dictator. So she was really a symbol of courage, I must say.
Thank you very much, Tariq. Thank you. There is online Linda McDonald.
Yes, hello. Evelyn was unique in the sense that the work that Jean and I have been doing on non-state tortures for 33 years, we've always had to go and reach out to people and ask them to listen to the stories. And Evelyn was one of the few that reached to us. I remember her emailing me and saying, you know, when I go to the UN in New York, I'd like to meet with you and Jean. And that was a rare thing for Jean and I, especially when Evelyn first started reaching out. And I'll always appreciate her support on the working group on non-state torture with the Alliance, and helping to organize the event with the art exhibit and get our books into the library in Vienna. So she was always a supporter. And I do thank Sophia as well, as Rashida said, for sharing her mother.
Thank you, Linda. And indeed, Linda and Jeannie, they are the promoter of this initiative on gender-based violence as a form of non-state torture and under the umbrella of the Alliance. So among the few men around, we also have the chair of the Alliance. If you want to say something, Ian?
Thank you very much. And I mean, I don't have much. So many moving words have already been said, but I just want to say, you know, somebody who's been involved in the Alliance for a few years, it was always clear how much passion Evelyn had and how much impact she had, and that's clearly been recognised by everyone here. We'll miss her, but I can see from the discussions today that her spirit will continue with the work that's being done.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. So I think that we have really collected quite a lot. I hope that we gave Sophia and the family a little bit of an overview of how rich and diverse was Evelyn's activity here, and how important it is for us to continue working with her. She's here, so she has not left us, of course. So it is something that we would like to continue in terms of having this type of conversation. I think that we learned a lot today because, after all, it was not a depressing discussion at all. So we had a lot of very, very important developments over time. And we know how much of this was due to the contribution of Evelyn herself and the people that she managed to involve in her activism and campaigns and the work that she was doing. So I am really honored because I'm here also in her steps, trying to support also the International Association of Democratic Lawyers to continue their engagement here in Vienna. So with this, really, I think we can give ourselves an appointment, let's say, to continue and to celebrate and to advance these very important issues together. Thank you very much and have a good day.